Today, we celebrate the global collaborations that have contributed to the advancement of gender balance in the UAE and the broader region, working in partnerships with organizations like the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, the UN, specifically the UNDP, OECD, and IMF. The UAE has built a unique gender balance model, leveraging global expertise to create a world of even greater possibilities and to unleash the full potential of every person, regardless of gender. Gender balance here in the UAE is not just a moral obligation. It is a critical component of economic growth and the key to creating a thriving and sustainable society. And because of our great leadership vision, a significant change has been made in the UAE, where gender balance is reflected in every aspect of society. Why do we need to engage with the international organizations? Why do we need to have collaboration? I'm sure that each one of us in this room receives such a question. And basically, my answer, I always say, we aim to share knowledge, co-design solutions, and of course, we seek inspiration from one another to establish regional benchmarks. And by doing so, we hope to develop a good working model here in the region that could be adapted. Another aspect of why we're doing or we need such collaborations is that we have used insights and recommendations from those international organizations to set benchmarks and policies to promote gender equality. And when I say that, I'm referring to reports. When the UAE Gender Balance Council was established in 2015, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, the Vice President and the Prime Minister of the UAE and the ruler of Dubai, set a clear KPI for the UAE Gender Balance Council. And that was to be among the top 25 countries in the UNDP Gender Inequality Report Index. Back then, we were ranked 49th. And today, the UAE ranks 11th globally and first regionally on that index. What I want to say that those actually reports help us to evaluate our systems and to improve our systems and introduce new laws, new policies to advance gender inequality. However, our ambitions go beyond global rankings. And the UAE is committed to implementing policies to bring about real change. And we will continue to introduce new policies and new legal reforms based on those international reports evaluation. Our first collaboration with OECD was actually to develop a gender balance guide and a toolkit for global advanced practices for gender balance. And recently, the UAE also Gender Balance Council and the World Bank co-host the UAE Gender Balance Center for Excellence and Knowledge Exchange, a regional center to drive equitable growth. Most recently, with the World Economic Forum, the UAE has become a knowledge partner, joining countries that drive gender balance priorities from the highest levels of leadership. Our government and private sector partners will now be able to share their expertise on such a global stage. Our collaborations have enabled us to develop a functional framework for promoting gender equality in the region, but our journey does not end here. We acknowledge that there are still many challenges ahead of us, but there are also great opportunities that we believe we can jump on and promote our best practices and our stories, and at the same time learn and build our capabilities and capacities from those engagements. Thank you very much, and I hope this session will reflect how important it is to have such an engagement with the international organization. And being globally connected with the world, this is one of the reasons why we're here today. Thank you very much.
Gender balance continues to be a critical issue in our world today, and it is essential to come together and to address it. Can you talk about some of the specific examples which governments in the region taken to advance and strengthen gender balance across the economy and society, and also including some examples from the UAE?
Yeah, no, thank you very much for the invitation, and it's great to be with you again. This is not my first time in this kind of forum, and I believe that I'd like to start first by saying how impressed I am. Every time I visit the region, but in particular here in the UAE, progress is absolutely incredible, and that's a matter of satisfaction for all of us, because we have been engaged in this conversation for quite some time, and it is encouraging to see that sometimes development and progress can be fast. We generally say, when I talk about development, we say generally, it's not instant coffee, it takes time, it takes breath. True, but sometimes when you have the right policy and the right political leadership, well, things move fast. And I believe that acceleration of history is absolutely fundamental here, and we see it. On gender, I would say two things. One, there is the ethical discussion about it. There is a clear need to make sure that we place ourselves at a certain level of ethics when we talk about gender equality. We are living all in the same society, we are breathing the same air, and we are frankly looking in the same direction. So there is no way one can feel that there is a social stability or social balance if you do not have gender equality. Equality and fairness, both of them go hand in hand. And then, of course, you have the economics of it. How can you have a country, prosper, grow, if only 50% of its workforce, is put to task? Workforce meaning in terms of muscles, but also very much brains and ideas and initiatives. So all of this is absolutely fundamental. Examples abound around the region and the UAE. So better than I am not going to go into much detail. But one thing that I'd like to say, and I remember I said it last time, this drive needs to be sustained every single day. Because unfortunately, there are some reforms that suffer from muscle memory. Meaning you move, and then as soon as you kind of deal with something else, it goes back to where it was. And I saw it in a number of countries where, dynamics have made it so that huge progress that was made over 10, 15, 20 years have been reversed or threatened to be reversed. Why? Because at some point, we lost sight of them. We thought, that was, a done deal. It's there. We don't need to deal with it anymore. It's something that is part of what is our new culture. It's not true. We need to nurture this every single day, and that's why having the council having this as a center of excellence and having strong political push from the highest authorities in the country is absolutely fundamental. Count on us, of course, to be with you every step of the way. But at the end of the day, no one can replace the breadth, the depth, and the commitment of all of you as we move forward. So on this one, my last point is you have done a lot. You have gone a long way. Keep going and count on us to be with you. And please don't take your eye off the ball, because otherwise, we may lose sight of the progress and we may actually find ourselves going backwards. So please keep doing it, keep pushing, and we are with you.
Thank you, Farid, for this incredible answer. It's really insightful. To leadership is very important when it comes to gender balance, and sustaining it. It's really important. And also keeping, consistent when it comes to those policies and interventions by governments, and working closely with international organizations. Sadia, I turn to you. Let's talk more about future preparedness. For a number of years, the international organizations, including the World Economic Forum and a group of countries, emphasized on the need to prepare women for the broader population for jobs for the future. The objective of this conversation is future preparedness has been to ensure to get ahead of gender gap in representation, in pay, innovation, especially in priority sectors such as AI, digital transformation, and so on. Can you share insights on how we progress in this area? What are the trends do you see around gender parity?
Thank you very much, and a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm thinking back to this morning and His Excellency Minister Gergawi and the conversation between him and Professor Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum. So much of that conversation was about how we build that future and how we prepare for the fourth industrial revolution. And that is very much about talent, that is about brain power, that is about innovation, that's about creativity. And the only way to get to those things is if we do have all the talent in the room for every single decision, if we deploy the full human potential available in any nation. And what does that look like if we start getting into some of the highest growth sectors of the future? Whether that's artificial intelligence, whether that is climate science, whether that is blockchain related applications, quantum computing. These are all areas where we need to develop much more STEM related talent. And that is exactly where there tends to be, to your point, a gap if we don't keep our eye on the prize. A little bit of global statistics here. Globally, 18% of women in tertiary education are pursuing STEM-related studies, compared to 35% when it comes to men. So naturally, to begin with, there is an imbalance when it comes to that pipeline. When it comes to reskilling and upskilling in the adult workforce, so those that are already part of the workforce, when it comes to reskilling and upskilling in STEM-related fields, so ICT and engineering, manufacturing, construction, that is where women, again, tend to be underrepresented, even when it comes to online reskilling and upskilling. Women currently make up in ICT less than 1/3 of the workforce. And when it comes to leadership in technology, again, there's a much lower average compared to leadership roles elsewhere. So 31% of leadership roles across all sectors and 24% when it comes to women's leadership in some of these sectors. Now, what's very promising in this region is how different it looks here. And especially for the UAE, 61% of STEM graduates are women. So you have not just the human capital, but also the potential to make this very different for the future. And that essentially means that the way that technology will be designed will take a much broader context into account. Nobody has a conclusive study that says that women are necessarily going to make very different choices, but they will make choices that are informed by a much different context than what men or boys tend to be informed by. And that can only be a good thing. It means the development of these technologies will be more creative, more diverse, more dynamic, more innovative, and serve more widely the needs of society. So I'll turn it back over to you, but thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit more about the global stats, but also the opportunity that specifically exists here in this region.
Thank you, Sadia. Mr. Shu, we had an interesting discussion yesterday with you, and you mentioned that you work in diversity of countries around the world, from US, Iran, across African region, Pakistan, and Kazakhstan. My question to you, from your perspective, what are some of the biggest challenges and opportunities around closing gender gap in different parts of the world?
Yeah, thank you very much. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Like all visitors, I'm sure we're all impressed by the transformation we've seen taking place here. And I think what we see is really an example, as Her Excellency Ms. Marie mentioned earlier. Oh, sorry, it's too close. So I think what we see today is really an example of equal opportunities for men and women, right? Pursuing their aspirations. And as Ms. Zahedi mentioned, 60+% of women graduate with incredible skills, right, within science and technology. So, but this is not happening everywhere. Right? That is a challenge, right? Because when it comes to gender issues, you have a lot of challenges, inequalities in terms of gender-based violence that is growing more and more serious, in fact, despite all efforts, and partly due to COVID, and women's participation in economic activities is lower today than before, also partly because of COVID restrictions. So that creates problems, and that reflects the kind of power balance, that we see in society. Right? And what does this mean? It means that in some societies we don't have a consensus, right, societal consensus, where men and women should have equal opportunities. That actually is good for society. Right? We have this challenge, and we also have missed the economic opportunities. And there are a lot of data studies that are done by different countries, and including World Economic Forum. I think in 2007, World Economic Forum did a study that said that a 25% increase in women's labor participation would unleash $5.7 trillion of global GDP by 2025, for example. So we're missing these opportunities. Right? And also, for example, I recently read a study that Norway did about their, increase in women's labor participation from 600,000 people in the 1970s to 1.1 million women participation in economy by early 2020s. That added 3.3 trillion Norwegian kroners to its GDP, for example. That is also because of part-time nature of the job. Now, if every woman, let's say, worked full-time, right, they would have added additional 2.7 trillion Norwegian kroners. Right? So these are potentials. So yes, we understand the challenges that there's a division of labor in societies and so forth. But if you flip this, if you provide equal opportunities, let women choose what they would like to do, you create enormous economic opportunities. In care economy, it's highly undervalued because most care are unpaid at home. Even paid, they are very low. Right? So in the Middle East, for example, women spend 5 times more of the time in care than men, for example. Right? So this contribution to society is not valued properly. Right? So if you really turn this around and look at gender equality as an opportunity of societal and economic development, you immediately create opportunities of jobs, supply chain economies, right? And also the satisfaction, right? The fulfillment of purpose, for men and women, right? Who can choose, And you also create opportunities of political participation, decision making, and the power and so forth. Right? So I think this is what we're talking about. It's not just politics; it's economics, it's society as well.
Thank you, Mr. Shu, for your perspective. Farid Belhaj, back to you. When seeking to address complex challenges, the UAE government prioritized partnership with international organizations, with the private sectors. For the past 5 years, we have seen incredible and incomparable progress in closing gender gap in the UAE and the GCC region. And this is partly because of government institutions working with institutions such as the World Bank to come up and to co-design reforms. What have you learned from these partnerships? What role does collaboration play in tackling other priorities, let's say for the future skills, energy transition, women overall labor participation?
What we've learned is that we have to deepen that partnership. What we've learned that we have to be in the field. We have our office here in Abu Dhabi to make sure that we keep pushing that agenda. We have developed a number of instruments that help us not only quantify what we have, but also help us open new doors. For instance, we have a very important piece of analytical work based on data. You know, the part of women in the business driving legislation. You know, this women, business, and the law. Very, very important piece of analytical work that actually give us all a platform upon which we can make an assessment, what is missing, what we can do more, and try to see with other places around the world how we can compare, you know, what's happening here. So I was saying earlier that there was an acceleration of history. We can say it confidently because we see what's happening in other parts of the world. Now, granted, you know, there is a trajectory here. We are not starting from where other places are starting, you know. But when you see how fast things are moving, it is important. So we need to have, you know, as World Bank and other organizations, you know, the UN agencies in general and others. One, nobody can do this alone. So we need partnerships among ourselves. You know, the quote unquote donor community, call it that way. But we're not giving anything. We are basically trying to engage. Second, there is also a partnership between the governments and us, because we can bring about that kind of comparators. And third, if I may put it this way, we partnering with us would help you, open doors to emulating what's happening next door in a very friendly and open way. We're not in a competition here. We are trying to make sure that we are balancing what's happening elsewhere and making sure that talented, educated, populations in this part of the world, very much women, are given their proper chance. When I look at, earlier when you were talking about, the level of education of women, I see it today in a number of our countries, from Morocco all the way to Iran. I mean, this is the span of what we call the Middle East and North Africa region. The level of education for women, surpasses the level of education for men. But then when the problem becomes a problem, and you know it, it's when you translate that into the job market and the participation in the job market. Now, there are places where things are really not moving forward. Take Jordan, for instance. We are still struggling with 13-14% of women active in the job market. But then there are places where things have skyrocketed. Take Saudi Arabia, who moved from 16%, I believe, to now 37%, and going. Same thing in the UAE and other places around the Gulf countries. So it's important that we keep the progress going. We see it, we evaluate, we assess it, and we make sure that we as international organizations, because maybe you have that kind of distance, we can come and say it in a friendly way, like it is, and help you, move forward. Last point I'd like to make, and this is internal to the bank in a way, one of my major efforts is to try to peel off this image of, women in the Middle East and North Africa region not being given a proper chance or not being able to seize the chance. Trying to, I don't like the affirmative action concept, but what I like is affirmation concept. Try to make sure that, in everything we do, in every project we envisage, we have that gender dimension into it, inscribed, in golden letters in a way. Make sure that, all of my colleagues understand that, yes, we are dealing with climate, yes, we are dealing with poverty, etc. Gender, the big G, is very, very much at the center of what we are doing. I was saying earlier, count on us. Yes, not only in talk, not only in analytics, but also very much when it comes to our financing. It is part and parcel of our effort to move this agenda forward. And we count on you because you are giving the great example. I was saying earlier that we are all proud of what's happening here. Proud as citizens of the Arab region, and proud because of what we see happening, with you and helping us, as a bank, to make the point that this is moving forward and this is really going in the right direction. And there are great examples. You cannot imagine how much, of a difference it makes when I or my colleagues go to other parts of the MENA region and say, these are examples. Look what's happening right next door. It is incredible. So please keep doing it for yourselves and for all of the women around this fantastic region.
Thank you, Farid. And truly, those countries' effort with international organization create this ripple effect. That not just only one country is rising, it's the whole region and surrounding actually be inspired by the action of that government. Sadia, back to you. An important element of the World Economic Forum work is to compel the business leadership to prioritize gender parity goals within their broader commitment. Can you speak about some of those policy and programmatic efforts that has reduced gender gap in the regional and global labor force? If you can give us some of the strategies that actually worked and some of the strategies that didn't work.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the question. One of the things that we believe is critical is actually tracking the gender gap over time. And since 2006, we have continued to provide a global gender gap index, trying to cover as many countries as possible, looking at health, education, economic, and political participation dimensions. And while the index is important, more importantly, it is the set of information around each country contextualized to what is happening within that country. That's what we've been trying to take forward. A second element that we've been trying to take forward is setting up networks between countries to learn from each other. And I'll say more about that in a second. What the data tells us at the moment, it's very clear. I think it would not be a surprise to anyone that over the course of the last 3 years, with the pandemic and the disruptions that it's created, there have been setbacks in women's labor force participation. This is around the world. There are a few places where things have been okay or are starting to bounce back, but in most parts of the world, there has been a setback, and a very large reason for that setback has been the lack of a care infrastructure. To your point, the care economy, if done well, not only supports much greater balance for everybody, but is actually a huge job creator on its own, and in particular for women who have tended to be very active in that sector, whether unpaid or paid. So there is a big opportunity there as countries look to grow their way out of the crisis to focus much more strategically on the care economy. A second element is what I already mentioned around focusing on the STEM professions. I think that is a big opportunity, again, for bouncing back and for leapfrogging forward rather than fixing only some of the issues of the past. And then a third element is, of course, around financial inclusion. And of course, many of the institutions represented here are focusing on that. And it's part of all of the experiments that have been taken forward by some of the countries that we're working with on closing the gender gap. I had asked my team before this panel to provide me with some examples of what has been changing in the UAE. And the list is so long that I don't think that I will try to put forward what in just 10 years has been a remarkable amount of progress. On that Global Gender Gap Index, the UAE has gone up 33 places. This doesn't just happen. This is not inertia. It is due to planning. It is due to those very specific policies. It doesn't mean it's perfect. It doesn't mean there isn't a way to go, but there have been efforts. And that's why I'm delighted about the partnership with the work that we're doing on closing the gender gap and with the Gender Balance Council and with the Center for Excellence, so that we can actually pull together what has been working in particular in the last decade or so from this country, but also from other parts of the world, and start making that much more visible to the global public. To do that, we'll be pulling together a parity consortium composed of ministers and CEOs, so again, the public-private angle, from around the world, not just from the countries that we're partnering with, but also from elsewhere, so that this issue really continues to have a global stage through data, through leadership, and through making best practices much more visible. Thank you.
Thank you, Sadia. Mr. Shu, what role do international organizations play in supporting countries to create robust policy frameworks to address complex challenges, including gender inequality in the labor market?
Thank you very much. There are really a lot we can do together. But since time is short, what I would focus on is the kind of concept or notion that we have coined to promote equal economics. We call it economics. There are a lot of new terms. This is equal economics. And we're going to work with 120 countries to provide a gender seal certification, work with the Ministry of Finance and the tax authorities to incorporate gender considerations in public policies and in private practices. So what does it mean is that, for example, for women's participation, active participation and contribution to society, to societal good to increase, you do need to look at the supply side as the university graduates, for example, right? The future-oriented skills. You need to look at the demand side, right? As we also talked about. You can unleash the demand by taking certain policies. But you also need the institutions to work. That's both public and private sector. So we have developed a gender seal standards for public institutions through 5 areas of standards, right? 20 standards specifically within the 5 areas. And we've developed also private sector gender seals for companies, for enterprises, in 8 areas through a 10-step process. Right? So this could be online, a platform learning process and the improvement process of not just one-off exercise. It is a process of 1 or 2 years. By following these standards, then we can reasonably be assured that the policies and the steps, the measures you take will support the gender equality goals. I'll give you just a couple of examples very quickly. In North Macedonia, for example, this gender seal process has resulted in government to invest in care economy. Right, just very shortly, right? And for example, in Rwanda, right, with the work with central bank to go through this process, they increased the women's access to services from 60% to 75% because of dedicated effort, including gender desegregated data, for example, right? Just one example from the private sector company. We have worked now with more than 1,000 companies in the last few years. And in Panama, for example, there's a company called Banismo, works on financing issues. Now they have issued a $50 million gender equity bond to support women-headed micro and SMEs. And I think this is a really interesting example. In Turkey, there's a company called Garanti BBVA. Now they are putting forward a gender-based loan whose interest rate is tied to how company is compliant with the gender equality standards, for example. So there are a lot of things we can do together. These are some practical examples.
Thank you so much.